This is part 4 of the Chapter 4 lecture notes. We left off with slide 64 with some checkpoint questions. Question 14 says, which type of connective tissue contains primarily triglycerides? If you remember, triglycerides are the lipids. They're the type of lipids that you find in body fat. So the connective tissue is going to be adipose. Adipose. Let's see if I can write it. Which is a loose connective tissue proper. Adipose connective tissue. Then 15 says lack of vitamin C in the diet interferes with the ability of fibroblasts to produce collagen. What effect might this interference have on connective tissue? Well, collagen, we said, was for strength, and in the bones, it's actually gives the bones a flexibility, strength and flexibility. So we're going to have some problems with bones. Bones aren't going to be as strong. The disease that can be caused in children who have a lack of vitamin C or not enough vitamin C is called scurvy. Oops. But in general, it can just lead to weak bones. Vitamin D deficiency is also, sorry about that, but it's S-C-U-R-V-Y, scurvy. Vitamin D deficiency can also affect your bones, but a lot of people don't realize vitamin C deficiency can as well. All right, let's go to 18. Why does cartilage heal more slowly than bone? Because it is avascular. It does not contain a blood supply. So that gives it a very limited ability to heal. All right, within this chapter on connective tissue, we have to go over the different tissue membranes. There are 4 different types of tissue membranes, and they function as physical barriers and linings and coverings. And they consist of epithelial and connective tissue usually, but like in the case of synovial membranes, they're almost completely composed of connective tissue. So here are the 4 types of membranes. There are mucous membranes, serous membranes, synovial membranes, and the cutaneous membrane is the skin. So mucous membranes, which we also refer to as the mucosae, line passageways that open to the exterior. Examples would be for the digestive system, you would have the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity would be lined by mucous membranes. The anus would be lined by mucous membranes. The respiratory, again, would be nasal cavity. I said nasal. I meant respiratory when I said nasal cavity. I'm sorry. The respiratory is lined by the nasal cavity. The urinary tract, where urine leaves the body, the urethra, sorry, I'm trying to think. The urethra is lined by mucous membranes, and then the reproductive tracts of the urethra of the male penis and the vagina are lined by mucous membranes. So mucous membranes have an epithelial tissue layer, which is typically simple columnar epithelial tissue, and then the connective tissue is areolar, and it's actually got a name. The connective tissue layer is called the lamina propria. Then we have serous membranes, and there are 3 serous membranes. There's the serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity, which is called the peritoneum. The serous membrane that lines the heart is the pericardium, and the one that lines the lungs is the pleural membranes. So there are 3 different serous membranes, but each serous membrane contains a parietal layer and a visceral layer. Let's see if it shows you a good picture. No, it doesn't. All right, so if you can picture this, picture your fist punching into a balloon. You have the part of the balloon that actually touches your fist is the visceral layer. And then the part of the balloon that's outside of that layer that doesn't actually touch your fist is the parietal layer. So the parietal lines the inner surface of the cavity, and then the visceral layer covers the outer surface of the organs within the cavity. So the visceral layer would actually touch the heart. It would actually touch the lungs. It would actually touch the organs like the liver, the stomach, the intestines, okay? The parietal layer would lie against the body wall. Like in this case, the parietal layer of the peritoneum would lie against the abdominal wall. The serous membranes do have simple squamous epithelial tissue, and then underneath that is an areolar tissue. All right, the three serous membranes are the pleura, which cover the lungs, the peritoneum, which cover the abdominal organs, the pericardium, which covers the heart. The cutaneous membrane is the skin, and of course the epithelial tissue forms the epidermis of the skin, and that is stratified squamous. And then underneath that you have areolar connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue that form the dermis of the skin. Synovial membranes line freely moving joints. So that would be, for example, the knee joint, the elbow joint, the shoulder, the hip, your finger joints. They consist primarily of areolar connective tissue. They produce a fluid called synovial fluid, which lubricates the joint. Checkpoint question. The lining of the nasal cavity is normally moist, contains numerous mucus cells, and rests on a layer of areolar tissue. Which type of membrane is this? It is a mucous membrane. All right, we have two other types of tissue. We've covered epithelial and connective. Now we have muscle and nervous tissue. We're not going to spend as much time on muscle tissue and nervous tissue because we have those are covered within the muscle and the nerve chapters. But muscle tissue is specialized for contraction. It consists of individual cells called muscle fibers. So muscle fibers is actually the name of muscle cells. It's not referring to a protein fiber like collagen or elastin. There are proteins that cause the contraction within muscle fibers. They're called myosin and actin. Muscle tissue can be voluntarily controlled or it can be involuntarily controlled, and there are three types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal muscle tissue is found within our skeletal muscles, of course, like the ones that we exercise when we go to the gym. This is showing you some muscles of the forearm, and you can also see the bicep muscles, the triceps, the deltoid, but that's skeletal muscle. And you need to know that the muscle cells or muscle fibers contain, the cells are very large and long, and they're multinucleated. They have many, many nuclei per cell. So very long cylindrical cells. They're striated, meaning that they have the striations or stripes that forms from the overlapping of the actin and the myosin within the muscle cells. And then skeletal muscle is voluntary. So make sure you know that about skeletal muscle and then just be able to recognize it. Now we have cardiac muscle tissue. You only find that in the heart. One thing that you will see in cardiac muscle tissue are connections called intercalated disc, and you also will see with cardiac muscle cells, you will see branching. Cardiac muscle tissue is striated and involuntary. It's not voluntarily controlled, it's involuntarily controlled. It's controlled by our autonomic nervous system. and it's also controlled by its own nervous system. The heart has its own nervous system. Nodal system. All right, smooth muscle is the one that you probably have to think about a little bit, because you know cardiac is the heart, you know skeletal muscle is the muscles that are connected to bones, you know, but smooth muscle you may not have heard much about. This is an individual smooth muscle cell. I'm going to try to trace it. See how it tapers at the ends? Kind of tapers at the ends. So smooth muscle cells are non-striated. You don't have striations in smooth muscle. They are involuntary, and you're going to find them within the walls of blood vessels, within the walls of, for example, your intestines, within the walls of your respiratory tract. And what they're going to do is smooth muscle is designed to move food, move urine, move air through the respiratory tract, move blood through the blood vessels. So that's smooth muscle. It says, and then it's funny that I just went over that. Which type of muscle tissue has small tapering cells with a single nucleus per cell and no striations? And that is going to be smooth. S-M-O-O-T-H. Smooth muscle. Okay, and nervous tissue, we call it nervous tissue or nerve tissue, is specialized for conduction, conducting or transmitting electrical impulses. You have nervous tissue concentrated in the brain and the spinal cord, and then it forms our nerves that extend out from the brain and the spinal cord. They're called cranial nerves and spinal nerves. There are two types of cells found within nervous tissue. The neurons are the actual nerve cells that conduct electrical impulses, and they do not have they do not repair easily. A lot of times, if they're damaged, that's it. You know, you don't can't replace them. Neuroglia is a term that refers to the supporting cells of the nervous system. They help support the neurons. And since I thought there might be some more information, but let's see. For example, neurons have extensions called axons that carry the electrical impulse to some target cell. Sometimes those axons are insulated or protected by something called a myelin sheath. And the cells that form the myelin sheath would be part of the neuroglia. We also have cells that are, function in defense, immune system type cells that are part of the neuroglia. There are cells that help maintain the blood-brain barrier that keep the blood separate from the nervous tissue so that, to keep it free from germs and pathogens. All right, this section is on the response to tissue injury. Tissues respond to injuries to maintain homeostasis. There are two processes that can restore homeostasis or balance within the tissue, and that is inflammation and regeneration. The cardinal signs of inflammation are swelling, heat, redness, and pain. Make sure you know that. Swelling, heat, redness, and pain. And that's the tissue's first response to injury is inflammation. Got a section on the inflammatory response. And then you also have some slides on regeneration, and I'm going to let you go over that. If I don't spend a lot of time on it, it's probably not something that I'm going to spend a lot of test questions on, if that makes sense. But make sure for this chapter that you know the 4 main tissue types, and make sure you know the different membranes of the body.